Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to present about choosing the right hive for you. So this is a beginner track, and I'm going to share my screen so that you can follow along with me. And this is a presentation by Be Mindful, which is my company and Les Crowder's company. And first, we're going to introduce ourselves. My name is Nathalie Biggie. I am originally French. I've been in the United States for about 25 years. I came to do my MBA at Ohio State University. Started working for corporate, doing project management, and at some point decided to leave corporate and started teaching some French conversation classes. And after that, I got a beehive for Christmas and fell in love with the bees and started beekeeping about 6 years ago and never looked back. So about a couple of years ago, created Be Mindful, which is a natural beekeeping company. And along the way, I've studied a lot of beekeeping and practiced a lot on Langstroth and Bar Hives and a bunch of other hives. I'm currently at the advanced level in the Master Beekeeper program, the Texas A&M Master Beekeeper program. And I am the current vice president of Hays County Beekeepers Association, which I created. I'm also the past president and the past vice president at Travis County Beekeepers Association. And I have spent some time in Africa, in the Republic of the Congo, where I was helping communities make a dignified income by training them on beekeeping. And also, we are doing, Les Crowder and I, some community outreach here in the United States. Which brings me to introducing you to my business partner, Les Crowder. He's the author of the book, The Tabar Beekeeping Organic Practices for Honeybee Health. He's got over 55 years experience in natural beekeeping, and he's a biologist, and he's my mentor, and he's a source of a lot of wisdom, and I am very grateful to be working with him. And we keep Langstroths, Layens, Tabars, Juarez, Longlangs, all kinds of hives. We have a teaching apiary here in Austin, south of Austin, and we teach beekeeping classes. And one of our topics is to actually help people choose the hives that best suit their needs. So this is where you can contact us, and I'll bring that information back at the end of the presentation as well. But like you can see, we do apiary tours, horizontal and vertical hives, all kinds of classes, ag exemptions, raw and filtered and treated comb, chunk, and liquid honey. And here's our contact information, the be-mindful.com and bemindfulhoneyfarms@gmail.com. The particularity of our company is that we do treatment-free beekeeping. So that kind of impacts how we beekeep and how we teach our classes. And let me explain to you a little bit how. This is the way a natural honeybee nest is organized in nature. Typically, they will find a cavity. Very often, it'll be in a tree, in a hollow tree, excuse me, but not necessarily. Just kind of the cavity that's the right size for them and that's protected enough for them to grow their brood's nest, their nest, and store their food and defend all that. So they'll have typically one or several little entrances, small entrances. Then they'll have a brood's nest, which is basically the area where they're growing all their baby bees and where the queen is laying. And in some seasons, they'll have drone comb, but in that cavity, they'll have a propolis envelope to protect them from viruses and microbes and things like that. And above the brood's nest, they'll have a layer of pollen because they're going to need that to feed their brood. And above that, again, they're going to start storing honey, nectar, and then honey. And as they're growing, they will bring those combs down vertically. So that's kind of like one of the traditional cavities that honeybees like. And they like the trees because they're very thick and provide a lot of insulation from temperature fluctuations, especially, which prevents things like condensation and chilling of the brood. But vertical trees are not the only way that honeybees function and grow their nests. They will grow their nests in horizontal cavities just as well. They don't have a preference from that standpoint. And they don't have preference to the point that they will even build open air hives from eaves or underneath trailers or flat surfaces. The particularity, though, is that in all cases they will start their comb when they start their comb at the top of the cavity. They will always build downwards and sideways, meaning vertically down and horizontally on both sides. They do not necessarily build only vertically. They definitely build horizontally as well. And that kind of is going to inform, hopefully, what you do to choose your hives. So an important thing to remember when you do beekeeping is that the importance of natural wax and foundationless. A lot of beekeepers keep their colonies on foundation to give them a rigid support so that they can manipulate frames. And that's usually in Langstroth vertical hives, and we'll get to that. But bees in nature do not do that. And as you can see here, whether you're using frames or where you're using bars or simple sealing, they will use natural wax on their own. And the importance of that wax is that it's a communication media for the bees, both in the way that they hold chemicals and the history and the memory of chemical signals through the wax, and that's kind of informing the colony as a whole. They also remove toxins from the colony and the honey because they absorb them away from the babies and the honey. But also they, because they're not supported by a rigid structure, they're able to resonate, to vibrate when the bees are communicating under the comb. Bees will, in the dark of the colony, will communicate vertically and all around the surface of the comb, which is built plumb with gravity. So they build their comb vertically downwards and then sideways. But they'll use that comb and dance on it and create vibrations with which they communicate. And so that's very important to have that comb not hampered or dampened by rigid structure. That's going to really negatively affect communication message transmissions throughout the colony, and therefore some up to a certain extent will prevent the colony from thriving as much as it would otherwise on natural wax. Because it acts as an information highway. The other reason why wax is so important is because the bees can build, and I don't know, this is an old comb that's kind of yucky, but I don't know if you can see, there's smaller cells for worker bees and larger cells for drones, the males, in which they also store their honey and their nectar. And sometimes when they're in swarming season, they will also build queen cells. So bees have all kinds of different sizes that they build on natural wax. And so they do that for a reason, because they need it. And when you use foundation, you're preventing them from choosing the size of cells that they need, which is taking away a little bit from their natural functioning. So about a little over 100 years ago, beekeepers discovered the concept of bee space. So as beekeepers, excuse me, as beekeepers, you're going to find that the bee space is very important. Basically, what it is about 3/8 of an inch in the Americas with the European honeybees. It's a little different with the African honeybees because their bee space is a little smaller. But here with European honeybees, it's about 3/8 of an inch between combs. So if you look at this drawing, this is between the combs, and pushing the wrong button. That's enough space for the bees to sit back to back and take care of each of the combs without being too squished or having too much space. So it's very important to respect that bee space, and the bees will definitely respect it. Because they do respect that bee space, it's allowed beekeepers to design frames and bars that will respect that bee space as well, and allow them to remove those frames for the vertical Langstroth hives or the bars for their horizontal Bar hives. Because to each frame or bar, there's only one comb attached, and it's not overlapping between the different frames or bars. Wrong button. Okay, so what that allowed is for the vertical hive concept to be invented, and it's leveraging that concept of removable frame and allowing beekeepers to place those frames into boxes that they can stack vertically. So that now they can go through the bird's nest and inspect the hives and remove honey without destroying the colonies, just like when when beekeepers used to keep their bees in skeps, for example. The combs were not removable, and every time they wanted to harvest honey, they would have to destroy the colony. They had no other choice. So with those removable frames, beekeepers can now inspect the colonies by removing single frames at a time and stack them into boxes so that they can inspect and manage the colonies that way. So the Langstroth, if you look at here, this is the ubiquitous one that's made out of those boxes that you see a little bit everywhere, the ones that the commercial beekeepers are using. And usually it has a bottom board and then a brood box. Some beekeepers will keep them on medium, which is the depth, and some beekeepers will keep them on deeps. But then you can add boxes as the colony grows, and as the honey gets stored into the colony, you can add that and then harvest it by taking away that box that's full of honey. So that's a great concept, but it also comes with some drawbacks. So in case you're looking for a good choice for you, here are some of the drawbacks of what the Langstroth is. It has several sizes, several depths of frames. This one on the right is it's a deep frame. The one in the middle is a medium, and then the one on the left is a shallow. It's called a shallow. And to each frame depth corresponds a depth of box. So you cannot, for example, if you had medium boxes like you had before, this is a medium and these are deeps. Well, if you have frames that are deep in here, obviously they're not going to fit into the medium, they're going to stick out. And if you have medium frames and you put them in the deep, they're not going to go all the way to the bottom. So the bees are going to start building comb underneath, natural comb, and it's going to become a little bit harder to manage. So that flexibility also brings drawbacks because they're not compatible between box sizes. Also, the Langstroth come in 5 frame, 8 frame, and 10 frame. So they're wider and wider and can fit more and more frames. But what happens is that they don't fit between each other. So a 10 frame won't fit an 8 frame, and so on and so forth. So that's another, there's a lot of compatibility and bulk ordering that's possible, but there's also a lot of incompatibilities based on the different styles of equipments that are available. And you can see that a little bit in that picture, by the way. This is where the frames are in, and you see here deep frames and medium frames into the box. And what happens is that also when you're you have to build all those boxes or buy them built. But when you're not using and it's not in season, you're not doing the honey, you're going to have to manage them a little bit differently and end up having to store a lot of equipment. Let me explain. So in the winter, let's say you have this Langstroth hive, vertical hive that has 2 boxes, 2 deeps. And then in the spring, you have to kind of switch the boxes around because the brood is now, so the brood kind of came through the winter and ate through the honey reserves that were at the top. So they're going to be at the top, and you're going to have to switch boxes to allow for the bees to have space to store honey in the spring and grow. And here with that yellow box that's representing honey, you're going to have to do some interesting management and put boxes in different ways. Again, not having mediums compatible with the deeps. But also what you're going to do is you're going to harvest that honey, and very often the beekeepers are going to harvest entire boxes of honey. And if you have a 10 frame box that's full of honey on a deep, for example, that can go upward of 90 to 100 pounds. So it becomes really heavy. Even if you don't have the bigger box, and if let's say you have an 8 frame box on a medium 8 frame super of honey, when you're harvesting and it's full, it can go easily into the 60 pounds. And so that makes it very heavy to manipulate. And if you are going through all the boxes to inspect your colony throughout the different levels, that makes it that much more lifting that you have to do. So if you have any back problems, that can be a big issue for you, and that might make it, not a good choice. If you don't have back problems, you might end up with back problems, so keep that in mind because they're very heavy. Some beekeepers will remove frames one at a time to save their back, but it makes it more tedious. And in the end, you're still transporting entire supers when you get to the house to bring it to extraction and all that stuff. So that brings another point. You're going to need an extractor. If you've got more than a couple of frames of honey, you're going to take it home. You're going to need an extractor. And those are very bulky and very expensive for some of them. There are some lighter ones that are a couple of frames that about, I think, $100 something, and they take a little bit less space. They're lighter, but they're still going to take some space in your garage, and they're used only during the season where you're harvesting, which is about once, maybe twice a year, for like about a couple of days a year. So that makes it inconvenient to have to store that extractor the rest of the time. Some Beekeepers Association have as their members benefit, they give their members access to the association's loaner extractors. So look into that. If you're going to do a Langstroth, you don't necessarily have to buy the extractor. You can borrow the one from the association. What you do have to do, however, is when you have removed those supers or those boxes, and you're contracting and combining boxes in the fall, you're going to end up with a stack of empty boxes and empty frames, some of which might have wax from the extractions that's still left on the frames. So that ends up taking a whole lot of space in your garage, and there's a lot of storage requirements for those. Also, there's some pests that might get into your wax if it's not stored properly. The wax moths really like eating through the wax, and especially if it has any kind of like cocoons leftovers, because that's protein, and then they're after that. So you can freeze them, which takes a lot of space. You're going to need a big freezer, or you're going to have to store them with special conditions. You can leave them like this person with some light and airflow, and that helps. Or you can just bag it in a double, in a heavy duty industrial bag, and stack them up until the spring, when you need to put them back under the hives. So keep that in mind. Those are some of the drawbacks of the Langstroth box. And I started with that because I tend to, we have a lot of Langstroths, we have a lot of top bars, and I find that for us, it becomes very tedious and very cumbersome. The other thing that you have to do is, when you go between apiaries, whether they're at home, a little bit further away from the house, or a remote area, you're going to have to transport all that equipment to the apiary and then back. And if you go to the apiary without having the equipment that you need, you're going to end up having to come back or not finish what you were trying to do, because it's not all there for you to use. It does have, however, a whole lot of pros, depending on what you're looking for. And some of them are that it's really easy, because they're so ubiquitous, for you to find resources, books and reading materials, mentors, and the equipment itself, because you can find it just about everywhere, including on Amazon.com. But we have a lot of suppliers also that provide bulk ordering options or individual options, such as Manlake or Dadant. And because of that, the equipment can be bought in bulk and at a discount price. Also, the drawbacks of the frames and foundation can also be considered as being advantageous, because they do provide rigidity in foundation, allows for extraction and high speed extraction. So when you have a lot of volume, that's really a good helpful way to extract your honey. But it can also be done manually with crush and strain, and I'll get to that. So the main advantage of the Langstroth is that you can reuse those extracted combs very easily, and it allows a large automatization of the process of harvesting. Also, it's fairly easy to stack those boxes and transport them, which brings us to commercial beekeeping, which is what these hives became very popular for. So industrial beekeeping requires a lot of complicated management, there's a lot of frame manipulation. And the other disadvantage, by the way, is, let's say, and I'll get to that a little bit, but if you have 5 frames at the bottom, and you need to put another frame in there, you need to have the space into the box, and vice versa. If you're putting an empty frame for them to grow, you're going to have to harvest a frame, and it can get a little bit complicated from that management standpoint. Commercial beekeeping. So like I said, if you look at the top right, this is what I mean by those boxes are stackable, and commercial beekeepers will put them on trailers and transport them across the country to go on commercial pollination contracts. For those of you who don't know, almonds are entirely pollinated by honeybees and by commercial beekeepers that are taking their hives from other forage areas, and basically following the flowering seasons of various crops throughout the United States. And in the winter, they bring them all back in the southeast of the country, where the weather is warmer and they can get an earlier start on their season. However, that the very fact that they're stacking all those boxes and together and delivering them in to pollination contracts means that there's a lot of promiscuity between the hives, where they're all stacked next to each other in unnatural conditions, which makes it, just like in a feedlot, easy for the colonies to cross-contaminate and just kind of transmit diseases and viruses between each other, which pushes the commercial beekeepers to use a lot of miticides, acaricides, and antibiotics and treatments, basically. The commercial beekeepers also tend to give supplemental feeding to their colonies to make them grow faster. They'll give them sugar syrup, they'll give them pollen patties, and all this to just mention the fact that the beekeepers, the commercial beekeepers, do that for a reason. They've got those commercial contracts of pollination that they need to satisfy. They've got financial constraints that they're trying to satisfy, and that's hard work. So I'm not throwing the stone at commercial beekeeping. I'm just saying that that's the way they're doing their beekeeping requires those Langstroth hives for specific reasons. But as a backyard beekeeper, you don't necessarily have to follow the same practices, because you don't have the same requirements of transporting your hives in huge numbers. So what I was getting at earlier, and I kind of threw things a little bit in the list here, but if you see here, this is a brood's nest that's spanning 2 boxes, so vertically, which means that if you're trying to manage and remove a box to contract the colony, all of a sudden you cannot do that because it's spanning 2 boxes. And if you remove, let's say if there was a smaller patch of brood up here and most of the brood's nest was in the bottom box, and then there was not much honey or not much resources, but mostly a little bit of brood and a little bit of honey in the center here, then all of a sudden, what are you going to do? You're going to have to keep that brood or take it away. And if you take it away, you're killing it. If you're leaving it, then you've got some empty space around the box on this upper level. And then even when you've got the box is set up like this was 2 deeps and 1 medium, and to go through the inspection, this is Les Crowder. He had to remove the cover, the feeder, the medium, and now he's got the 2 deeps. But even if he wants to go to the bottom deep, he's still going to have to remove another box. And then if he's got any adjustments and moving up and down of the frames to do, or sideways, everything gets very complicated because of the size differences. Again, that's heavy. You have to bend over with heavy weights. You have to twist. You have to, as your colony grows, adjust the size by adding boxes. As it contracts, you have to remove boxes that are becoming empty, because you don't want the bees to have to protect empty space. Because if they don't, they're going to end up with pest problems like wax moths or small hive beetles. They really have to protect all that. And then that empty resources, so when I say empty resources, it could be the empty combs that they've built wax onto, and that they are not using. There's nothing in them right now, and they need to be removed if there's no bees covering them and protecting them, or they will become prey to those pests. And so you have to adjust the size of the hive accordingly. And if you don't come back in time and add a box on top of your Langstroth in the spring and it's growing really fast, you might end up having a colony that's going to end up swarming on you. So the size management has to be very involved, and you have to be paying attention to what's needed for the size of your colony. You have to add or remove boxes. So it's not as easily modular also as a top bar or horizontal beekeeping options, and I'll explain to you a little bit what that means. But basically, it's not as easy to use bars that are at the end of the hive. The other thing that's you know, ends up bothering us as natural mindful beekeepers is that when you are removing those boxes, all of a sudden you're exposing that entire bird's nest, which is working really hard on a constant basis to maintain very specific temperatures, levels of humidities, and even levels of pheromones and chemical messages in the hive. And so when you do that, you're actually stressing your colony. And it's especially on cooler days, all the heat that have worked really hard to build up to try to keep the bird's nest at an optimal temperature. If you go in a spring inspection and it's not very hot, it's like 50, 60, 70, all that heat that they have in the bird's nest, as soon as you open that box, is going to evaporate and just kind of like, they're going to have to work that much harder to kind of fix that. There's also, and I misspelled chimney, a chimney effect throughout the vertical box. And if you have any kind of empty space at the top, or even the honey at the top and the bird's nest underneath, the bird's nest is what's generating the heat. And if there's anything above, that heat's going to rise away from that bird's nest, and that's going to make them work that much harder. In some cases, that heat and that vapor from their breath is going to go and rise as a chimney effect, and it's going to hit a cold cover, and the exchange of thermodynamics is going to create some condensation, which might, in cooler temperature, fall back down onto the bird's nest and chill them, and you can end up killing your entire colony like that. In addition, these hives have only 3/4 of an inch thickness on the walls, and they're not very well insulated. So if you live in a cold climate, you just want to make sure that you be mindful of that. In Texas, we're okay for the most part, but that's something to keep in mind, that exchanges of temperatures are a bit higher. And as if you remember what I was mentioning at the beginning with the tree trunks, the bees like that thick insulation in there if possible. They're not always very picky. They're not always very smart about where they pick their cavities or where they build their nest. But as a general rule, they will do better with better insulation. And then they don't build above their roof. So when they start a comb, they build downward. So by putting empty boxes on top, you're doing something that's pretty unnatural for them. You're putting empty space that's going to be disrupting not only their thermodynamics, but also force them to want to build upward a little bit when they wouldn't do that naturally. And sometimes they just don't want to do it. So you end up with swarming and overcrowding at the bottom, and until they decide that they want to build upwards, and you might end up losing some of your bees because of that. The winter feeding can be done on those hives by, the best way I think is to put the feeding above the boxes, and for that you can use a tray feeder, and I don't have a picture, but this is one of them. That's sitting on top, in which you can put honey or sugar syrup, and your own honey, not grocery store honey. And you can also use, a lot of beekeepers will use frame feeders. A lot of the commercial beekeepers will use frame feeders, and it's kind of hard for them to reach if they get on one side and the frame feeder is on their side. It doesn't get warmed up. And also it gets to be quite dirty. Beekeepers don't remove them very much and don't clean them, and they can be a space where small hive beetles can hide, and they don't get emptied of old syrup, so it can ferment as in those as well. So we don't like using those frame feeders, but we recommend you use something that like a tray feeder, or you can put your inner cover, which is the cover that's inside the hive but above the frames, that has a hole, another box, another medium, and then you can use a vacuum feeder over the hole to just kind of keep the feeding in hive. You don't want to feed outside of your hive anyway. You're always going to want to feed inside of your hive to avoid robbing issues. And what happens, especially in the wider 10 frame boxes, you're going to end up sometimes with outside frames that don't get covered with bees, like you can see here. And so they don't get defended from pests, or they don't get built out completely before the bees start going upstairs. So those are considerations that you might want to keep in mind in your choices. And this is what can happen also. You can have the bees being on a heavy honey flow, try to build up and not have the space, because again, you have to be on top of management of the amount of boxes that you have on the colony. And in this case, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of wax and honey kind of sticking out this way, and you're going to clean it up, but it's going to drip a lot of honey inside the colony, which can potentially kill your queen. So be mindful of that. And like here, for example, let's say you had like 5 frames of, or 6 frames of honey, and then 2 frames that had some brood and or no honey. You can harvest that box if there was no honey and take off the entire box, or if you don't want to take all of it, then you're going to have to replace those frames into that space here to make sure that it has all the frames in there. Because if it doesn't, the bees are going to build on you in the building season, and you're going to have cross-comb and a mess that you're going to have to clean up. So you have to be very mindful of that as well. Oh, and those frames, don't get me started with the frames. You have to either buy them or make them yourself, assemble them yourself. And what happens sometimes is that you're gonna have pests that are gonna attack that unprotected comb, and these are wax moths, and they're gonna basically web up the entire mess and even eat up at the frames and the hardware, the boxes. And you're not going to be able to clean those very well. It's going to be really a major pain to try and clean those properly. And so all that equipment is going to be gone unless you are willing to expend the effort. That's not the case with the other type of hive I'm going to present to you. So I want to take a little minute about the treatments, because we're talking about commercial beekeepers and how the bees were transmitting viruses and all this stuff. Commercial beekeeping, they do a lot of treating their bees, and they use all kinds of products, chemicals that are either soft chemicals like the wood bleach, the oxalic acid, or the organic acids and everything, and some of the harsher chemicals like Apiston and Apivar, Coumaphos, fluvalinate, things like that. Those are toxic both to the bees and to the beekeepers. Some of them can leave residue in your wax and in your honey. And the problem is that if you get colonies from commercial beekeepers, their chances of them having been treated is going to be very high. But as a backyard beekeeper, you don't have to do that, because you're not transporting your bees to pollination contracts and things like that. You have to keep in mind that all treatments are toxic to bees. There's sublethal effects and some full-on lethal effects, or reproductive consequences from those treatments. So just keep in mind that you have to follow the integrated pest management pyramid, which is the way that livestock keepers make sure that they can keep the pests and pathogens at bay. And they're supposed to start, especially with the honeybees, with the identification and understanding of the pest, knowing what they are, what their life cycles are, and knowing what the signs are, and then cultural controls and sanitation, which are good local resilient survivor stock that's not treated, good queen bees that were well mated, just good sanitation practices. Don't So that's kind of what I was getting at. Also, try to not swap your frames or boxes between colonies if you can, or between apiaries, and definitely not too much between beekeepers if you can avoid it, because you don't know what kind of diseases might be transferred or contaminating your own colonies that way. And then physical and mechanical would be interventions such as trapping, barriers, small entrances, things like that. So yes, the more you stay below the red line, the more work you have, because you're supposed to keep an eye on your colonies and make sure that you proactively take action if you see issues. You need to educate yourself. You need to learn how to read frames and so on and so forth. But the biological step is not a very available one in beekeeping, and the chemical step is something that should be avoided. It should be kept as a last resort. And usually when you've gotten to that level, it's because you haven't really done what needed to be done before that, and you haven't prevented the problems from getting too bad. And that's where that prevention comes into place. This whole three steps are tied into prevention and intervening in natural ways. So remember that the top part of the pyramid is toxic and prevention is the best. So that was my side note, because we were trying to make sure that you understand that you don't have to treat. You can keep your bees without treating. So don't flip the pyramid on its head, and by proactively treating and systematically treating your bees. So that was my side on that. And back on track, one of the reasons I mentioned this is tied into the commercial beekeeping aspect of things. And you don't have to do the beekeeping, you don't have to beekeep the same way that your commercial beekeepers are doing it, because you're doing it on probably a smaller scale, and without all the stress that the bees are getting exposed to when they're getting transported and so on and so forth. So that brings us to natural beekeeping, and where it says leave the bees alone. It's not 100% leave them alone all the time. I have to caveat that. You have to leave them alone as much as possible without neglecting them. So we don't inspect our hives more than every couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks, and unless there's an issue that we're dealing with. The bees build their comb in the hives just the way that they are in nature. When you're doing that kind of beekeeping, they will build using natural comb, and they will follow the same structure that they do in nature. And the principle here is to be bee-centric, meaning that you care about the health of the bees, and you're mindful about not stressing them, not taking too much from them, and respecting that they are doing the work, and not overtaxing them for your own benefit. And this is a picture of a Bar Hive comb. And what you can see here is that they're actually much gentler because you're not exposing the bird's nest, and you're just kind of the way the hives are managed in that case, which fits the natural beekeeping precepts, it makes them a lot gentler. They're not as disturbed as when we using the vertical boxes and ripping open the whole colony that way. So the concept is that of horizontal hive, which fits clearly into the natural beekeeping. This being said, I want to mention that if you have a vertical hive, you can also do natural beekeeping. You can be on foundationless natural comb. You can keep your bees mindfully and not go in there too much, and follow some of the same principles, and definitely follow the integrated pest management pyramid I was talking about, and keeping it below that threshold of no chemical, whether they be soft chemicals like oxalic acid or essential oils or all the organic acids, or the chemicals, the conventional synthetic chemicals that are a lot harsher and a lot worse for the bees. By the way, all those chemicals have a negative toll on the colony, so keep that in mind as well. So the horizontal hives, they've been around for thousands of years. I think the Greeks used to use a concept that was similar, and it's basically a single-story horizontal box in which the natural combs are built off of bars that are touching each other. And if you remember, these also respect the bee space, and these are not the same depth, but basically they're gonna touch, and you're gonna have a roof, no space between the bars, and the bees will build their comb directly from the bars. Some of them will have nothing. Once they start building, that'll be just fine for the bees. As long as you respect the bee space, they will follow one comb per bar. And some of these have a guide to kind of help the bees follow and build straight comb. So those are two types of bars, but the principle is that they're all touching. And when you get to your hive, initially, like imagine this would be down and everything is touching. So when you first get to the colony, the bees don't even know you're there. Also, the colonies usually are from one end where the entrance is. So you can open the hive from the back and get to the first few combs like these, and open. This is wide open for the taking the picture, but usually you take a couple of combs, you get enough to move things around. So it doesn't expose your bird's nests. It definitely doesn't let the heat escape from above just the same way that it would if you were to pull out the entire cover. And you can reach the first few combs. Some of them will be empty, probably. Then the next one will have some honey, some nectar, and then you will end up hitting the bird's nest, and you kind of move those combs each time to the side. So the combs hang directly from the removable bars. So again, you're following the same principle as if they were building off of the bottom of a building, or the bottom of a trailer, the bottom of a eaves, or the top of a cavity, and not putting any empty space above it. And they interfere very little with the colony because of this principle. The other advantages of these colonies, and I'm going to show you a little bit in more details, is that they're extremely easy to manage and cheap to make. It doesn't take a lot of expensive materials, and they're very simple. And they're used all over the world for that reason, including in Africa, because they're super simple and you don't have to use necessarily wood. Here are some of the examples that people have used for making bar hives. The principle is the same. All those bars are touching and forming a contiguous roof, and the bees are building the comb underneath. But this is a Les Crowder barrel hive. He's kept bees in barrel hives for years. It works just fine. This is one that's a little bit more fancy. That's got a window even where you can look. And by the way, those are kind of a gimmick, the windows. You don't really need those. And they have some drawbacks as well. But if you are wanting to show your friends once in a while, it's kind of cool to be able to pull them down. But the other types of hives can be made out of bamboo, out of sticks, out of mud, out of palm fronds with cow dung on it. It works really well, by the way, apparently in Africa to attract swarms. But that bar that was removed here doesn't weigh much more than 6-7 pounds, even when it's filled with honey. So, and it's at your waist level, so it's not you're not going to have to bend down and lift up a lot of weight. So it's going to save your back, save the bees, and you can even put those bars like this upside down, and it will hold your comb, so you can just take pictures. It's really hard. You cannot really do that with the frames on the Langstrath. So this is pretty practical, actually. So some of the biggest pros and advantages of Bar hives, the horizontal hives, they're cheap to make. And once you've got the box set up with the bars, that's it. You don't need to add any more bars. You don't need to add any more boxes. You don't need to take away any boxes or bars. Everything is there. And if you were to, and I'll show you about harvesting, but if you were to remove a comb, all you have to do is put back another bar. Or if you're cutting, if you're harvesting on it, you cut that comb and you put the bar right back into it. They're super easy to build. People with very few carpentry skills can build those very easily. And they are actually even cheaper when you're using thicker wood, which makes them better insulated. The horizontal management is much simpler than the horizontal and vertical combination, because you're only doing you're moving combs only in the horizontal plane. So your bird's nest is only going to stay into that cavity and expand and contract depending on the season. It's not going to go up and contract and expand that way. So it's not going to span across several boxes. So it's going to be a lot easier to manage that kind of bird's nest. No heavy lifting. I mentioned that there's no storage of all that equipment that you're going to have to, that you would have had otherwise to bring back in and out. It's going to be natural comb by design, because the bees are going to build straight from the bar with natural wax. And a big advantage over Langstrath is that you can put a partition in the middle and end up hosting 2 colonies, one on each end, as long as they both have an entrance. And so that makes it very cheap for people that are looking to do ag exemptions or grow bees, and want to have a couple of colonies, at one time, because new beekeepers are recommended to have at least 2 colonies when they first start, so that they can troubleshoot if there's any issues, or compare one to the other. Then that makes it a lot easier to have just one box and those 2 colonies, and then you can swap resources as needed. Bars versus frames. Again, those bars allow for natural comb shape, which structurally has a purpose for the bees. It allows for natural cell size, which the bees need all kinds of sizes to function. And you can accomplish the same thing in Langstrath, by the way, if you're not using foundation. If you're using natural comb, it's called foundationless beekeeping. And then the way this is managed is going to allow them to be calmer and healthier, because they're not as stressed. So there's not going to be all those expensive and tedious flimsy frames. They tend to break. They're, you got to transport them back and forth. Yada, yada. There's no issues with equipment compatibility, as long as you're using the same types of Bar hives. Yeah. And we recommend the 19-inch Bar hives, because they will have a longer bar, and therefore longer attachment, and they are going to be shallower than 17-inch. That's the other option very often. 17-inch is narrower attachment and deeper comb, which means that the honeycombs tend to break a lot easier than in the one that has the more attachment, the 19-inch. you're not going to have to deal with expensive and toxic sometimes foundation. You're not going to have to deal with an extractor, and I'll show you in a minute how to extract from that kind of colony. And oh, I get twice healthier, calmer colonies. So before we get into the honey matters, remember that some people will say that Langstroth produce more or Bar Hives produce less than Langstroth. Well, in reality, it doesn't matter what kind of hive you have. Everything being equal, management practices being equal, forage being equal, colony genetics and circumstances being equal, honey production is not a function of which type of a hive you're using. And by the way, I'm only discussing the main two types of hives because we recommend that you stay within the most common colonies when you first started, more common hive types when you first start, so that you can, one, get some information and mentoring around your area, but also so that it's compatible and you can find the resources that you need. So keep the other ones like we have for our teaching apiary for later if you can. You'll be a lot happier by staying with the main two types, which are the Langstroth and the Bar Hives in the United States. But again, everything being equal, honey production is not a function of which type of hive you're using. It's going to be a function only of the volume of the hive. So if you're doing foundationless, if you're doing same queen genetics, same weather, same forage, same colony strength, and you're managing them the same way, you're going to get the same volume of honey. And actually, if you listen to Les Crowder, I'll tell you he'll get more honey. But I think that it's just a matter of the volume of the hive. So this is Les Crowder, and he's taken out one of the combs of honey that was ready for harvest. There was nothing on this outer edge, but he wanted to demonstrate how to harvest. Usually they're full all the way to the rim. And all he did is take a bucket and used his hive tool, scraped off the honeycomb into the bucket, closed the bucket, put the bar right back onto the hive. And that's it. So he's just leaving with a bucket of honey instead of leaving with boxes and frames of honey that he's going to have to extract once he gets home, and that he would have to replace with new ones while he's extracting the ones that he could bring back later. So it was a very simple process here of harvesting honey that you're going to extract. If you were wanting to keep this, this makes for a wonderful cut comb, and so that sells at a huge premium. And the other product that you can make is chunk honey. Some of the cones of Bar Hive beekeeping, well, there's less reading material available because they're not as common in the United States. In finding a mentor, but maybe a little bit more tricky. And a lot of Langstroth beekeepers do not know how to keep those and will tend to manipulate the bars. If you're a Langstroth beekeeper and you're used to foundation, you're going to manipulate your comb like this, right? Your frames, because there's that support of the foundation that's going to prevent it from collapsing. If you do that with a top bar that's got honey anywhere, the top of the frame, the top of the comb, and especially in the heat of Texas, if you do this, like this, it's going to end up falling off and breaking off here. So you have to learn to manipulate in the vertical plane only. So you can do this and you can do this. And that's allowing you to put it flat on but you can move it this way. If you move it like this, it's not going to work out for you. What is great is that if you start with a top bar training, then you can do it with the lengths as well. If you start with the lengths training, then you're going to have a harder time getting used to the top bar manipulations. They're also less transportable, especially if you've got legs on them. You're going to have to remove the legs. If Les says that if they don't have legs, they can stack crisscross and be more stable than the stacks of Langstrasse. But the general consensus is that they're less transportable and they're not meant to be transported as much. And then larger scale extraction can get trickier because all of a sudden you're gonna do some crush and strain of that honey on a larger scale, whereas you could have done extraction of frames on a larger scale. And again, that special handling of the combs. And if you break something, though, there's such a thing as a rescue comb that you can use to fix that. So the crush and strain is what I was talking about. You get those combs that Les had in his buckets, and you can just put it in one of those strainers, honey strainers, crush it with a potato masher over a bucket that has a paint liner, and it'll drip. Your honey will be filtered, and I mean, not filtered, it will be strained, and it will work just fine. Whereas with the Langstrasse, you can put all those frames at once into that extractor. Now, keep in mind that if you don't have all the frames filled in, you're gonna have to balance out that extractor to make sure it doesn't, like a washer that's off balance, you wanna make sure that it's not doing that. And also if you only have a couple or even 5 frames in this case, then it's gonna make it not really worth it for you to get all that work done and have to clean the extractor for just that little amount of extraction. But that extractor or that bucket will have a honey gate, and it will flow through and get strained, and then you can bottle it. And so you get the options with both hives to do liquid honey, definitely. If you're using foundation in a Lang, you cannot do this. If you're doing foundationless, then you can do comb honey. And that's one of the biggest advantages of the top bar hives also, is that you can do a lot of comb honey, and you can sell that as a premium. You can package it and take pretty pictures and sell it as a premium. It sells for almost twice as much as regular honey. And by the way, I was talking about treatment and all the stuff. If you're treatment free, if you're not using treatments, including the soft treatments that oxalic acid are or essential oils are, then you can sell your honey and your comb honey and everything at a premium, because people are looking for that, and more, they're willing to pay the extra premium for that clean honey. This is chunk honey that you can do also. You can cut pieces of that comb and put it in liquid honey and sell that as an intermediary. It's kind of like a little bit of the best of both worlds. You have some of the comb, you have some of the liquid honey, and it keeps really well in the honey, by the way. So the advantage also of a top bar hive is that you can easily make it with very limited carpentry skills, which you need a lot better carpentry skills with Langstrasse, because it's precise. You have to build those frames, you have to respect all the spacing, and the boxes have to fit on top of each other, or you're going to have gaps in issues. They have to be square and at the right depth to match the frames that you're using, and so on and so forth. So it's a lot easier to do that with a top bar hive. All you need is a couple of boards. In this case, these are Les Crowder's plans, and I would say instead of 1 inch, which you can definitely do, if you do it with a 2-inch board, then it's going to be more insulated and cheaper to build. Or you can use scrap reclaimed wood, because it doesn't have to be all super square, and it works just fine. So you're gonna cut 2 trapezoid ends, 2 sides, and one that's gonna be used as a bottom, and you're gonna assemble it as such. And then if you want a partition in the middle, you're gonna get another end piece, trapezoid piece, and you're gonna put it in the center, open 2 holes on the side. And then what you're gonna have to do is build those bars, and they can be just this simple bar that's got the right width for the bee space. This one has a hole, and I'll tell you why later. But basically, those are pieces of wood, sticks that you can cut on a table saw. Very easy. It's very repetitive. There's not much to do. Once you've calibrated your table saw at the right bee space width for the bars, you just keep going. You just feed them in there. Watch your fingers. But other than that, it's super easy. Materials, again, the 2 boards, and then you're going to have rain cover. For the budget options, we use corrugated metal, but then I'll show you, we do some fancy ones as well. And then for the tools, it's good to have a table saw for the bars, and then this is a circular saw that you can, if you don't have a table saw, you can do a lot of the work with this. For the bars, it becomes a little tedious and a little bit harder. That's why we recommend a table saw. Then for the roofing, you're going to need tin snips, and then you're going to need a drill and screws. So it's really basic equipment that most everybody has in their family somewhere. If you don't have the screwdriver, like in Africa, they will work with hammer and nails. That's another option. I have the fancy equipment, so I really enjoyed that. This is a compound miter saw and makes it really easy, but everything is about cutting the wood, and the table saws for the bars, and that's less working. Well, we were team working, trying to build for the Bar Hive making workshop. We had to build, like, I think 25 hives at once, and it's okay. We can do that in a day. Because it's so simple. It's just repetitive. It's so easy that actually when you assemble it, children can do that. We would not let them run the saws, but they're super easy to assemble. It's basically just those pieces that I mentioned. You just kind of screw them together, drill a couple holes for the entrance, add the bars that you just cut. They're all the same. Some of them will have guides, some of them won't. But at the basic level, it's super easy. And this is the finished product. We added some legs, but you don't have to. You can just leave them on cinder blocks. And that's a very easy way to build a hive, very cheap way to build a hive. And this is the rain cover that we tie with a rope, basically. And again, this is the principle of having the partition in the center to allow for 2 colonies, 1 on each side. And then you can get fancy. This year I designed a roof that's kind of like a Ferrari style roof that also finishes that hexagon, because we're respecting the 30-degree angle for the hexagon, and it's what's matching the hexagon in the hive. So we believe there's some kind of synergy that works for the bees, because they don't attach the comb so much to the walls that way as they would in a 17-inch Bar Hive. So if you're interested into the things that I've talked about, the kind of hives that is best for you, I would recommend you read both these books, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Beekeeping, because it's focused on, it's got all the basics that you need to know. It's going to tell you all about how to manage Langstroth for sure. And for more in-depth information on how to manage a top bar beehive and the plans to Les Crowder's top bar hives, this is his book, Top Bar Beekeeping: Organic Practices for Honeybee Health. I highly recommend it. These 2 are, like, in my opinion, every beginning beekeeper should read these 2. And then if you're interested for a complementary book that has a similar philosophy and approach to beekeeping, that's going to leave your honeybees a lot healthier, is this book, Keeping Bees with a Smile. It was originally written by Fedor Lazutin in Russian, and Dr. Leo Sharashkin from horizontalhive.com has translated it in English for our pleasure. It talks about Layens hives, which are another type of hive that's horizontal. I don't necessarily recommend a Layens hive. They are a great concept, but they're not easy to extract or to harvest honey from, and they're not common at all. So this is kind of a French type of hive in the United States, although they're very common in the Eastern Europe. This is our teaching. These are the types of hives we have in our teaching apiary. Those are not necessarily our hives. This is my Wari hive. I've had this one for 6 years, no treatment, no supplemental feeding. It's gorgeous and very healthy. This is our Layens hive I just talked about. We have a lot of Langstroth. We have a lot of top bar hives. We have a Wari slow flow hive, and we have what is called a longlang. So longlang is a kind of hybrid between a tabar hive and a Langstroth hive, whereas it has a horizontal box and it's horizontal management, which is great, but it's using the frames from the Langstroth. So you can interchange between the Langstroth and this one. So you can install also a Langstroth nukes in them and use the Langstroth frames. The only, for having one and managing two as well, I can tell you that those covers also get removed and tend to expose the bird's nest a little bit too much. They also tend to warp and not fit back into place very well. So you end up having to juggle with that. And also they also, oh, I forgot to mention, these vertical boxes, they tend to crush a lot of bees because when you're closing them, the principle is that you're kind of like getting two flat surfaces to touch each other, and the bees get trapped in between and they get smooshed. And it's really hard to not crush bees with Langstroth, especially when you're manipulating like heavy supers and trying to put them back into place. Now with the tabar hive, I could show you, hang on a second, I'm going to show you. Okay. So this is a, I have my microphone. There we go. So this is a tabar hive nuke. It has, the walls are slanted at the top, right? Because they're not cut. So when you put the bar on top, if you can, let me try to prop it up. That bar is gonna not touch, but just one edge of the, right here, of the bar underneath. So you very few chances of crushing bees there. So that's another advantage of these. Oops. And then we have in the works AZ Slovenian hives, and potentially in the future a SCAP. And I'm working on a natural tree trunk hive in a hollow tree trunk that I have collected from a forest abscond. But I would recommend, when you're looking for a hive, to examine what kind of physical strengths you have, what kind of type of beekeeping practices you want to apply, if it's commercial or more natural backyard beekeeping, how many hives you're going to want to get, and how much you want to be involved in their beekeeping, how much space you have to store equipment, and what else? Also, you want to make sure that if you're going French, like the AZ Slovenian hives or the Wari hive or the Layens hive, you're not going to get as much compatibility with other hives, and not as much information on them or mentoring available. So keep that in mind, which is kind of why we recommend sticking with one of these two, the Langstroth and the tabar hive. And quite honestly, trying it is really loving it. If you ever have the opportunity to try a horizontal tabar hive, you're going to fall in love with it. So the again, our contact information is bemindful.com, be-mindful.com. And you can also reach us at bemindfulhoneyfarms@gmail.com. If you're looking for top bar hives, we have plenty. They don't get very expensive at the budget level, and definitely cheaper if you are using it as a partitioned hive than Langstroth. We do have classes upcoming. This is a little bit older, but we have some classes coming up. Our last classes for 2020 are coming up on at the end of November. We are going to have 101, 202. Those are on Zoom virtual. And then 303 is going to be hands-on in the apiary, our last one for the year. And then on the 14th of November, we're hosting a double top bar hive making workshop with Les Crowder. He's going to show students how to make those, assemble them, manage them, and he's going to share his philosophy. And the students are going to take home a one of those double top bar hive, not the fancy one, but the basic one. And so if you're looking to get set up in your apiary before the spring, that's a good way to do this. That's it for me. Hopefully I've answered a lot of questions and provided you with some considerations to keep in mind. It's not that I want to discourage people from keeping bees in the Langstroth hive. It's just that there's a lot of information out there that's promoting the Langstroth and that's giving you a lot of the advantages. I wanted to remind you that in all honesty, not enough is being said about their drawbacks. And so that was the purpose of that conversation, and also to kind of compare that to between vertical and horizontal beekeeping, and let you know that the options are there. You don't have to get into vertical beekeeping or Langstroth beekeeping. As a backyard beekeeper, you can definitely look at other options. And I hope personally you will pick horizontal top bar hives. If you make them yourselves, if you get bees in there yourselves, you'll be probably very happy with what you see. So this is it. My name is Nathalie, and thank you for watching this. If you have any questions, contact us, and we'll be happy to help out anytime. Thanks. Bye-bye.